Shalom and welcome to Superheroes for the Messianic Lifestyle here on landnetwork.tv, where we interview people who shahalachu, who've been walking the life of Torah for a while now, to give you hope that you're not alone in your understanding that God still cares about his commandments and still considers them the standard of a holy life and wants us to live by them through the lens of the finished work of Yeshua the Messiah. My name is Darryl Weinberg of A Light to the Nations Messianic Ministries, and I am honored to be your host. And tonight, I have the privilege of sharing with you the story of someone I consider to be a good friend. We've known each other for many years, and that alone is a testimony, since neither of us has gone running away screaming from each other. So that tells you that we must be called. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to a good friend of mine, Winston Lawson. Hello, Winston.
Hello, Darryl. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, and it's good to be with you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us and being willing to share your story, because it's quite a story.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, you and I met probably, first time maybe 15, 17 years ago, something like that. It was at Melech. I'm pretty certain of that, in Toronto. So you live right on the outskirts of Toronto.
Yes, I do. Northern city, north of Toronto, Brampton. It's it's a growing town. Let's just say it's a growing city. So it's not exactly small by any means.
Well, all of Toronto is growing. What's there, 6.5 million in the metro area now? Something crazy like that?
Yeah, it's exploding, that is for sure.
And I'm reminded of it every time I have to drive into town.
Lovely.
So, again, the purpose of this show is that we want to interview people who've been walking the Messianic lifestyle for a while. What was your introduction? What was your faith growing up? What did your family practice? Give us a bit of background on that.
Well, as a child, my mother raised us as Adventists. We were Adventists from my childhood, as early as I can remember, up until I was about 12, 13, when I was baptized in that church. And literally, I'm not kidding, it was like the minute I got out of that water, the world said, no, I got a different plan for you. So, kind of walked away from the church, and I was a teenager with no direction and just, getting in with school friends. And it was a lifestyle in the early 80s growing up. I just wanted to go have fun. And over the years, it had gotten worse and worse, and I had actually become an atheist. Well, most of my 20s and part of my 30s, until I was actually called in my mid to late 30s, I guess, right? Yeah, and it was a brother who was excommunicated from the Adventist church. It was amazing how Father used him to call me back to him, though, because being that I was a child and I knew a little bit about scripture, I remember when the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons or whoever they were would come up and speak to me, and I know that they were never really big biblical scholars, so to speak. Neither was I at that time, but I knew I had been read up until that point enough that I knew I can question them about their practices and their faiths. And it was actually a very mean, nasty thing to do. But when you're an atheist, anything you can grasp to belittle the next guy, particularly believers and Christians. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it was pretty harsh at times. Do you know?
Yeah.
And then after that, this gentleman who Father used to call me, I was in his home study for about 2 years. And then he decided to move away, left the country, went back to his native land of Trinidad. And I was left in the breeze. So I went back to the Adventist church for a very brief period, for about 2 months maybe. And then my mother had a friend who was a member at Melech. And she had talked to my mother about it. My mother shared the information with me. So that Shabbat, I went down and had a look, and, I never looked back, so to speak. That's how the story goes, That was my introduction to the Messianic faith.
So what was it that spoke to you when you went? Now, Melech Israel is was the oldest Messianic synagogue in Toronto. It was planted early 70s, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, so what was it that's, because there is some overlap between the Seventh-day Adventists and the Messianics. I mean, both keep the Shabbat.
Yes.
The things kind of go off the rails after that.
Yeah, that's probably all they have in common.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to eschatology and the plan of Israel. But what was it that really spoke to you?
Honestly, when I got in there and I witnessed of my first time witnessing a Torah scroll, you
Mm,
hear about it, and it was just an amazement to me. And not to mention, I don't want to knock the SDA church or the SDA movement, but it was all I knew up until that point, right?
right.
And I've never seen believers celebrate their faith like I did when I came into the Messianic movement. So
Mm,
immediately I was hooked. I mean, the rabbi was up front dancing. You know what I mean? In the SDA church, you'd never see a pastor up front doing a dance. You're just not going to see it, you know? But
right.
they actually celebrated their faith. They celebrated God's word. And I thought, wow. And that was the first thing that hooked me. I said, okay, I need to learn more.
Mm,
That was the first thing to grab me. Like, it was just a very joyous feeling in the sanctuary. And I've
mm.
never experienced that in an SDA church ever.
There's a lot of denominations you won't experience that in. Dancing is verboten in a lot of places. And it's weird how we always tend to knock legalism or Pharisaism, and yet each denomination will have its own set of rules and regulations that it abides by. We I gave I gave a copy of my book to a lady down here, and she's Dutch Reform background. And all of the people in the Dutch Reformed Church that have seen my book, the issue that they have is that they think that the picture on the front of the book of God sitting on the throne is violating the third commandment of not making a graven image. And so this has become a real stumbling block to them.
You're kidding.
And the commandment is not to make an image so that we bow down to it. I don't think anybody's looking at the cover of my book and bowing down to it.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
So again, it's this, we've got all this legalism and everybody kind of bucks at it, and yet everybody's got their own set of rules that they abide by, which they're going to adhere to, but not necessarily God's rules. And so there's a lot of freedom that, if it's a healthy congregation, and you and I both know that there's a lot of craziness in the Messianic movement, it can get messy. I think that's the key word there. But if it's healthy and it's balanced, I think you get the full expression, and that sounds like what it was that you experienced there.
Yeah, well, I again, when I first came into it, there was an ocean of wisdom that I had never been privy to. Like,
Mm,
ultimately, the feast days, the
right.
statutes, because, like, as you know, in most of the apostasy of Christianity, it's those things are done away with, or they were for the Jews, or that was a common one in the SDA church. Those things are for the Jews. And right away, my question would be, well, wasn't that also part of the tithe? Why do you keep the tithe? Like,
Yeah.
it was that did not go over well. But I would ask them all the time, like, you keep the Sabbath, you keep tithing, but what's wrong with the rest of the laws? And we don't. And where's this priesthood? And these are the questions I'd ask. So naturally, I got myself in a lot of trouble with them. But when I came into the but when I came into the Messianic movement, like I said, there was an ocean of knowledge that I had never been privy to before. But you spend enough time in there, and you start to see where the biggest problem I found in there was, it wasn't even so much about God's laws or Messiah's teachings, like they would mention these things, but it became more of a culture thing. Do you know what I mean? as
Yeah.
opposed to like really living by the laws. So they would take the laws, they read the laws, they know the laws, they understand the laws, but then in the application thereof, well, let's, we can take a bit of this and we can use a little of that. You know what I mean? Now, I understand you're not going to find a perfect place in the earth. It just doesn't exist. But I do believe we should strive to the best of our abilities.
Yeah. And Leonie Johnson says, Winston, big up yourself.
Oh, she's on? Hey, hello, Leonie. How are you? Yeah, it's a
You'll see
surprise
her.
to me. It's a
You,
surprise to
you'll
me,
see her.
Leonie.
You'll
No, I
see
don't.
her chat on the Lamb Network page and the chat function there.
Yeah, I don't
So
think I'm exactly logged in there. But hello, Leonie. Good to see you. We'll hear from you. Yeah,
anyway,
this was a surprise to me as well.
yeah. So all right. So you get introduced to the Messianic movement, and you see some very positive things, but then you started to see some of the other side. So what happened after that? What was the next part of your journey?
Well, it's almost difficult to speak about these things because what really happened was a lot of spiritual things is what started to take place.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to get dreams, started to see things, and things were being revealed to me that just didn't make sense. And the things that were being revealed to me, which were a problem, what I was seeing in a lot of these dreams, were fitting what was happening I seen in this fellowship, this congregation. Besides that, I don't blame the rabbi who was there. I really don't hold this to him because, as you know, when you're a leader of a congregation for any length of time, like especially in years, you've got to worry about all the different bodies and souls that walk through that door. And every one of them have an idea about how things are supposed to be done. So now when you're in leadership for 20 years, 17, 18, 20 years, you can almost understand why a person would become hard at that point. And
Right.
they really become, they don't want to bend in their position in any way. They refuse to even listen to suggestions once you become that callous. And I started to see a lot of that was taking place. And actually, a lot of the behavior I would chalk up as tyrannical, to be honest with you. So I knew it was time for me to move on from there. And then I ended up in Lomi was the next place I went. And the wealth of knowledge that teacher gave, goodness me, to this day, I don't believe I found a teacher as good, to be honest. Because he really opened like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the spiritual warfare is the first time I'd never heard about the practice of spiritual warfare and the things we got to deal with in the body until I got there, you know? And yeah, I spent some time there and learned a lot there, but whenever there's a good things there, the adversary's got to find a way into, mess everything up, right? It's terrible, but we have to strive on,
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you have one son, and you also have a couple of foster kids.
Yes.
So
well, I
have
my eldest. Pardon me?
I said, tell us a bit about that.
Okay, yeah, my eldest, he's a grown man now. He's 35. He's actually an engineer for Dufferin Construction. He builds roads, the highways and such. He's actually a believer. Him and his wife are actually in the faith as well. So, and it's funny because all the years as a child, me raising him, I was the furthest thing from a believer. And yeah, he managed to come along, so that's a fantastic thing, a true blessing. Him and his wife. His wife actually left the Muslim faith, Islam.
Oh.
Yeah, and she's now converted over, and yeah, it's been interesting. She's still at odds with the family about this issue, but which is understandable.
Well,
and then yeah, the two younger ones. Well, it's only the boy now, but I fostered these children for about 4 years, I guess, until the girl, she aged out and she decided she wanted to go back to mom. And the boy now, he's 16, and and he's still with me. We're buddies. You know what I mean? But to me, he's my second son.
Hmm.
I've been in his life since he was a child. I did know his father. His father passed in 2018. I know the mother, and she had gotten herself in some trouble a few years back, and it got real ugly. So when they were apprehended by the city, I says, okay, I'm not going to leave these two kids to strangers, because you hear the stories,
Mm.
and I had been intimate with them in relationships, so I just could not leave them to strangers.
Right.
So I was in position. So yeah, I went and got them. The CAS worked with me. Actually, father. It was truly father that put us all together. You know what I mean? It was amazing the things how he pulled out the stops. I tell you, the God we serve is incredible. He truly
Hmm.
is incredible. I can tell you some
Amen.
stories there. It's just incredible.
Amen to that.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So you make the switch over to Light of Messiah, and then things fell off the rails there, as we've all documented in detail. So what happened after that? It was kind of a wilderness journey for you from there on in for the next little while.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I remember the day after the Lomi thing happened. We went to another brother's house, and I'm not kidding. After this brother's, when we would go to his place on the Shabbats, for what I got out of it and the way I felt leaving his home on the Shabbat, I may as well have been in a strip joint, partying, drinking beer, and we're supposed to be keeping Shabbat. I thought, okay, well, this isn't gonna work out. So after that, I praying to Father on the issue, and I got a phone call from another brother who had left Melek and decided to start up another fellowship. Now I went to it. I don't know if you're aware of Talmud Yeshua Fellowship had opened up at that time, and
Right.
the guy who started it up phoned me up this Friday. I just finished praying about this and said, okay, here. But Father had already revealed to me in Hebrews. I was reading in Hebrews 13, and where that verse, I think it's verse 10 or 11, where he states that we seek the continuing city, for basically we have no home and we're looking for the one to come. And
Mm.
it came to my mind at that moment that what I'm looking for doesn't exist in the earth. So my big problem that came to me, and I won't just lay this at the Messianic movement alone. I would have to say churches in general, congregations in general. You
Yeah.
see, when I was in the world and the lifestyle I lived, I always felt I was loyal to a fault in places I shouldn't be, people that, stuff like that. And so when I came into the body, I expected and thought that, hey, everybody's like me in here. We're looking to get out of the world and serve our God, serve the Messiah. And I thought everybody thought like me in there. When I tell you some of the despicable things that I seen what so-called believing brethren would do to each other, I mean, I never saw some of that stuff in the street that I would see it taking place in the body. So when I
Yeah.
attended that new fellowship, I thought I was there briefly, and I could see the writing on the wall, because there was no what you would call a leader, a rabbi, anything like that. They were just brothers trying a thing. But it's, that old saying that says absolute power corrupts, and, and how it goes? It corrupts oh yeah,
Power
absolute power.
corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Absolutely, that's right. So I seen it coming. It was in front of my face, like it's written across the wall. So I said, you know what? It's time for me to back out of this. And to be honest with you, I started to do the online thing. But then you realize after a time that fellowship is a must. It
Mhm.
truly is a must. This is not a walk you can do on your own. It really isn't. Even if you just go in on the weekends to say hello to the brother, you gotta be connected to a body,
Mhm.
because on your own, you most certainly will end off the rails, and which is what happened to me. So in about 2011, 2012, I actually started to backslide, started going back into the world. And what was so difficult about that was I had too much knowledge now. I had too
Mm.
much wisdom about how the world actually goes, how Satan's really got his paws in everything out there, even inside the body. You got to be careful, right?
Right.
And the story, it's amazing, the story, how Father called me back. I don't know if you guys want to hear it, but I'm telling you, it was a miracle. And the things
Mm-hmm.
that he showed me, it was just absolutely incredible how he got
Lay
me.
it on us, brother.
You want to hear it? Okay, well,
Lay it on us.
I was working at this company for a time. It was just a temporary position for another job that I was doing, right? I was in a department. We were three in a door company. And because I'd been indoors for so many years, I got a job in this factory. It was just for a brief moment, a stint till other things I was waiting to work out. And I was in the custom shop, right? Because we took all care of all the custom doors and all that came in, because again, I'd been at them. So anyways, there was one guy in there who was a friend of mine. He was actually good, but the manager of the plant did not like him. So it reached the point, well, I never knew then, but this was all Father's doing. So he removes this one character, friend of mine, to another, puts him right up front of the office so he can watch him all day and just drive him nuts. So anyhow, the next day he brought this other guy started to work there. I was already dabbling back in cigarettes. My language wasn't exactly the way it should be for a believer. And I was, like I said, I was slipping back into the world. And I'd known this guy one day, but the second he came into our department, I just looked at him and I knew. I said, this guy's a believer. I said, this is a man of God. I just knew immediately he was a man of God, eh? So we went up, said our introductions. Hello, how you doing? How long you been indoors? You know, the usual shop talk. And we just, he's a new guy to the department. So you're watching to see what he knows, if he knows what he's doing, that kind of stuff. We got into no conversations or anything. Just, we didn't know him. He was new. The next morning we got to work, and it was 9:15 break that we took our breaks at 9:15 in the morning. This brother walks up to me and he says, Jason was his name. He goes, hey, listen, Winston, I got something I got to tell you. I says, okay, well, he goes, look, I don't presume to know you. We only known each other for a day. All right. Actually, I need to back up a moment. Earlier that week, this was like a Thursday, I guess. It was like the Monday. It was before work. I remember I got up at rose about 3:00 in the morning, and I confessed to Father. I says, look, I recognize I can't do this on my own. I recognize that I'm slipping back into the old man. I recognize that I need you and I need help, right? I didn't get an answer for it at that time, but I confessed, look, I'm falling here, So let me get back to where I was in my story now. That morning, that 9:15, this brother known me exactly one day. He says to me, I got a word from Father last night about you. I said, what are you talking about? I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I says, what are you talking about? He says, listen, our Father been telling me that he's having a very difficult time reaching you, and that you are so stubborn, and that I am in position to lose my salvation. I mean, my jaw was sitting in my lap. And immediately that came to mind was my prayer that night, that, okay, so this was Father's answer. He goes, and it was the first time I had witnessed a brother, a person of faith, like cry to me in his spirit. Like I could see his soul and it was crying for me, like where he was coming from, eh? Anyways, that coming Shabbat, I found myself back in fellowship. Hey, when somebody tells you you're about to lose your salvation, I know what that means. And you know also what that means is I'm not going to have another 20 years to figure this out. Mm-hmm. Chances are good, you know what? Your dirt nap is coming very soon, a lot sooner than you think, if you don't fix this. Because what am I doing here? He gives us this grace period to do this walk and I have to find him, right? So now I found him and decided, nah, you know what? I'm finished with that. And this is the problem, Darryl, that really, the part that got me to backslide is I started to learn that not everybody who calls you brother is your brother, And that was actually the thing that made me say, you know what am I hanging out with you people for? I may as well go back to the world, because when you're dealing with people in the world, you know to watch your back. You know to keep your back up, because you know most people in the world have an angle. You just know this,
Right.
especially from the life I'm coming from, right?
Mm.
And in the body, you're expecting that you could put that, shed that shell, that protection, that cloak. You figure you can shake it off. But then you learn that, goodness me, you got to really watch the brethren as well.
Yeah, well, Paul in Acts chapter 20, when he's in Ephesus, he says that savage wolves will come in
Oh,
and
absolutely.
they will, they'll rip apart the flock, they'll scatter them.
Absolutely.
I had a very similar experience where I got saved. It was 25 years ago. I walked into the congregation. I figured finally, for the first time in my life, someone's going to actually address my needs. They're going to be concerned because I grew up in a house where the only way you got what you needed is you yelled louder than everybody else. And so I walk into the faith and I thought, okay, so someone's actually finally going to be concerned. I walked into the same environment that I grew up in. And so then someone took me out for coffee one day and we're talking about things. And I said, listen, it's no different in the congregation and then what I grew up in. Why would you expect me to operate any differently? And it's a real shame that in the body, in the very place where you're supposed to be vulnerable, where you're supposed to be able to trust one another. I mean, what does Philippians 2:3 say? Esteem one another higher than yourselves.
Amen.
And yet it just, because you know what you're saying is the reason why it's so insidious is because they do the things that the world does, but then they spiritualize it on top of that.
Absolutely.
And that makes it all the more wicked and makes it all the more painful. And it makes it all the more grievous to God when he gets ready to wind up. And so, yes, I I fully understand what it is that you went through there.
But the funny thing is, though, what I also had come to learn was, as much as I would go to Father and gripe, like I've gone to Father and I said, Father, I know you tell us that I must love my brothers and love my brethren. And I would say to him, Father, I can't stand them. I can't stand them. I don't know how to love them. I can't tolerate them for 5 minutes. And right away, I would think about Moses. Like how many times did he really want to throttle some of those guys? Do you know what I mean? And he truly was a special man. But the thing that Father would bring to mind all the time is, well, what makes you think you're special?
Yeah.
What makes you any different than they are?
I got to put up with you.
That's exactly what came to mind, And then in that, I remember, you know what? You need to be patient, just as our Father's patient with you, Again, that doesn't mean you got to go out and openly be a sucker, but at the same time, you got to be patient because not everybody. I heard an analogy. I was going through an issue with some brothers on a scriptural verse, which I never should have got into this vain dispute. I'm actually ashamed of myself. But it not dawned on me. I was reading another article from another brother, and he was talking about, actually, it wasn't even a religious article. It was just a secular article about psychology. And he was talking about how our internal clocks, everybody's got their own internal clock, right? And you just wake up at a natural time every day, right? So I started to think about that and applying that to scripture. And it's like, well, not everybody has their lights click on at the same time. You know what I mean? So far be it for me to get mad at someone who can't understand the things I'm trying to show them, right? They haven't got there yet. That's all there is to it. Their internal clock, their light has not switched on yet. And then some in the body, the light never turns on. You know this as well.
Well, and this is the struggle that I think a lot of us go through, those of us who are awake to this. And when I interviewed Carl and Leonie, for instance, and they spoke about Leonie's family's reaction to them coming into the Messianic understanding and just the resistance that they got. And I think every single one of us goes through this, no matter what spiritual background we come from.
Yeah.
When you switch teams, as it were, and you start being obedient. See, the devil is okay with you doing whatever it is as long as it's not the truth.
That's a fact.
But once you start keeping the commandments, because that's, of course, the key to unlocking the blessing and his defeat, because now he's afraid of you. because you're walking in your power, in your authority, and God's going to work through you to get stuff done.
Amen.
But man, the attacks that you get, and so share a bit about how that whole experience went, because you said you had some pretty tough opposition.
There's one brother I often would discuss this with. I haven't seen him in a long time, basically since the lockdowns, COVID and that. And something that we would always share and laugh and talk about is when I first came into this walk, like even before the Messianic thing. And Father started to reveal himself to me. He started to show me things, and I'd read in scripture. He'd open my mind up to things that are happening there. And when I started to walk, it's like what we would call now the honeymoon phase, right? So you're coming in, he's showing you all the wonders, the beauty, the joy, the peace of mind, that shalom when you first come into the walk. Like, it's almost like you've got this blanket of invincibility wrapped around you. And then one day, he says, all right, it's time to take this thing off. And he says, all right, let's see you walk now. You know what I mean? And boy, oh boy, when I tell you, I realize now why my wilderness walk had to last so long. Because I was, just as that brother Jason said, stubborn. And the more stubborn you are, the more he's got to shake it out of you. See, I used to be a guy that was in the world, and if I needed to get money, I knew how to hustle. Do you know what I mean? I put this together. I bought my house. I bought my townhouse. I had my garage full of toys. Me. And one by one, during my wilderness walk, I watched it all disappear. And the funny thing was, the last thing he took from me was the job. So I watched everything else go away, and then he took the job. The only thing I had left at that point was, I guess, the house that I was a co-owner with my sister, right? And then ultimately that too. It was like, okay, well, I just put it in my heart, I got to get out of here. So I had her buy me out, and I went my way. And I'm telling you, that wilderness walk, Darryl, it was brutal. When he's showing me everything I'm trying to put together, I couldn't accomplish a thing. I mean, things that I've been doing my whole life that worked out for me wouldn't work. Absolutely nothing. And he was showing me. And it was, I'm telling you, it was like after the house, the last thing I could hear. And it was like he said to me one day, well, can you hear me now? I had all that clutter in my life. I couldn't hear a thing he was telling me. So it all had to go one by one. And boy, that wilderness walk was not kind. The adversity I suffered, it was just everything. One day I got upset with him, I says, your Torah says that we would not be the tail, we'd be the lenders. I says, all these things your word says, I'm not seeing any of it. I says, I'm not calling you a liar, but I don't see any of this stuff. So where is it? I got upset with him one day. The next day, that same job I was telling you about, I got a call for that. Things got so ugly. I'd never known broke in my life to that point, Like, you go through hard times, but in that wilderness walk, he stripped me. He took it all. He put about 80 pounds extra weight on me. I wasn't even the same guy, It was brutal. It was brutal. Every corner I turned, everything was just ugly, wrong, and broken. The funny thing was, when I would pray and in the feasts, particularly in the Feast of Weeks, the counting days of the Omer, he would reveal so much to me in the night hours. I would have to keep a notepad beside the bed, right? Because I'd get up and I just write things down that he was showing me,
Yeah.
So that I was strong and close with him at that time. But everything else that was happening on me around the world, in like my worldly life, everything was a mess. It was just a disaster. I didn't see the blessings at all that his word talked about. That's the truth. It was brutal. It was very ugly. But I understand that I was extremely stubborn too. So you have to work that out of me.
It's there's a few of us that are like that. And the paddle, I think the paddle is extra thick for us.
Yeah, some of us, absolutely.
So I told the Lord when I'm asking something, I said, now you know who you're dealing with, so make sure you speak slow and clear.
Exactly. I say the same thing. Look, I know I got a stiff neck. I know I do. So please, I know and that's why even when we do our prayers, that's my biggest thank. I thank him for is his patience. Above everything, I thank him for his patience with us. Because surely if it was up to me or even you, I'm sure none of us would be here right now.
I
No
was
way.
I was just talking with someone about an hour ago. I said if it was up to me, I would have blown the whole thing up by now.
Oh yeah,
So,
long ago, long ago. And I thank him for his patience above all things.
I tell people all the time, you better thank God in heaven that I'm not in charge.
That's right. It is so true. It is so
Yeah.
true.
But I think it also gives us a picture when we see that with how he deals with us and how we ought to deal with others. And it's humbling. I mean, you look at the life of Yeshua and how gracious he was and how patient he was and how kind he was. He didn't put up with guff,
No.
and there's, I think, where the mistake is with people. It's either one or the other. And that when it came to religious pride, he had no tolerance for it whatsoever. But for the downtrodden, for the brokenhearted, for the outcasts, he was extraordinarily patient. And even when they were trapped in the most heinous, and if you look what's going on in the world now and what people are trapped in, and one of the reasons there's a couple that I follow and they speak about this all the time. The reason why judgment hasn't hit the earth yet is because God is still trying to deliver those who do have the capacity to be saved into a place and get them positioned so that they can be saved from the judgment to come.
I agree, because in all reality, we aren't ready. We truly are not ready. This earth is not ready. Even the body, the believing body, it's just not ready.
No.
And we gotta smarten up quick, because we can see that day henceforth. It's well in the mail.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you look at how things are going around the earth, I mean, we have never been closer to nuclear war before, and I don't think people really understand how close we are to this. And if that goes, then you're going to have a whole bunch of people who are going to say, okay, I need some answers. And are we going to be ready to take them in? I mean, look what's going on in Kentucky right now.
Yeah.
And that fire is starting to spread. But one of the things that Dutch Sheets has said is that this is going to be very difficult to manage. It's going to be difficult to steward all this because there's no one leader. There's no organization. It's just you're going to have millions of people who are going to start coming in. And are we prepared to start ministering to them?
Absolutely. That's a huge
And
question.
those of us who have gone through the wilderness experience will be able to identify with them. We'll be able to relate to them and empathize and said, I know what you're going through, and we can walk you through it. And that's where we have to be.
I
So
agree.
you make your transition back. You got the whack upside the head. And so then what happened?
What happened after that? Okay, I got myself into fellowship again, and again, because now I would consider myself a little more studied. I was no expert by any means, but I knew a lot more than I knew 10 years ago, right?
Right.
So I know that most of us, I know I did. We go through this walk, we figure we've learned something now, and then we get through that Torah tyrant phase, where you start calling everybody, hey, wait a second, man, that's not what the Torah says. You're not living that right. Hey, you're not doing that properly. The Torah says this. And so you go through that phase. And it wasn't until actually for a very brief time I ended up at Rabbi Ben's place. And the one thing of all the lessons that everything I ever learned from him was, pardon me, my throat. The one thing I learned from him that always stuck with me was this whole point about there's no condemnation of the law. And when he described it, the way he put it down is he was showing that, like, look at, again, back to the light I was talking about, our internal clocks, our internal lights. It's, you truly do need to be patient with people, But when I went into that one other fellowship, then when I went back to them, and by that time it had changed. The original guy who started that congregation had left. Matter of fact, he came out and he said that repented of teaching Torah to people, repented that you're not even supposed to be doing that. He went back to the Sunday church, and even from that, I heard he's not even doing that anymore. And
really?
the family's gone into complete disarray. I mean, the picture's bad.
And
but
he has 10 kids.
You know the guy I'm talking about. Yeah, I didn't want to mention it, but the picture is not good. It's not a good picture. But again, dear. I still have faith that Father's gonna, once you've known, because I know when I was a child and I was baptized, I was so upset about it. And then I went into the world and I would argue with my mother, why would you make me go do something like that? What did I know? I was a kid. You know what I mean? And it wasn't until I came back, and that pastor at that Adventist church, and because when he rebaptized me, there was 2 other kids there at the same age. And I says to him, should you be baptizing kids this? I give my argument. I says, this is what happened to me in my life, and this is what happened to you. Think you should be doing that? And he said to me, how do you know that baptism wasn't the thing that saved you? All these years, I thought, I think I'll shut up now. So when I went back to that place, though, and this is when I learned how crucial it is, just as you mentioned, about proper teachers teaching these people coming in. You have to be wise, you have to be seasoned, because the couple of the individuals who had taken over from this guy in that congregation, I mean, I had to ask one brother, like, what Bible does he read? I says, because I haven't heard any of these things in the King Jimmy or any of the other ones. Like, what Bible does this guy read? I mean, I was so frustrated with those guys. And then one day, I'll say it was after 1.5 years of attending there, I had just reached my pinnacle. I couldn't swallow no more. It had reached the point in there. Another brother from Lomi actually was attending there with me. And the 2 of us would be sitting in the back comparing notes that we learned from Rabbi Don, right? When these guys would be up there talking, and we'd be saying, but wait a second, Torah doesn't say that. Bible don't say that. And we'd be back there comparing notes. So it got to the point because they wouldn't receive anything you said to them. So what we would do is we would stand, open the scriptures, and read the text to speak to the point that they were going on about. Because you couldn't use your own opinion, they would never receive it. So we would read directly from the Bible, and Darryl, it blows my mind how brethren can develop a literal hate against you when you read the word to them because it goes against their narrative. Wow. It boggles my mind. So when I was in there and that whole thing blew up, and I was like a bull in a china shop when I left there. It was terrible. And Father had to...
When was this?
Oh, we're going back a number of years now, maybe 6 years, I guess now.
Okay.
It's been about 6 years. And when I left, I left ugly. And the funny thing was when I got home, because while I was sitting there and giving them this argument, just then the Ruach said in my ear, they don't know me. So I paused for a moment and I was mad at myself because I spent 1.5 years in this place with you knuckleheads, and you guys don't even know who our Father is, who our Messiah is. That's a revelation. And I got mad. I erupted, all that pent up, and I left like a bull in a china shop. It was ugly. And the problem was when I got home, Father chastised me because he said, I had planned to use you for a work. And when you get in that spirit, I have no use for you. So, and which the amazing thing was that week I went into a fast because I had to cleanse myself from all of that. And another sister, and another couple that I know fasted with me in this, right? It was his word actually that told me I had to leave that place. So the amazing thing was the 3 of us did our fast, 3-day fast. And the Shabbat, I seen the lady and she said to me, you're back in the wilderness. And this is what Father told me too. Father says to me, "You're going around that mountain again." I didn't even know I made it out of the wilderness. He says, "You're going back to the wilderness." And the couple who was standing with me in prayer, they moved to Tanzania right now, but they both got the same thing from Father, that one, don't go join any other congregation. Two, you're back in the wilderness. So it was me and two witnesses. And Father told me that you're going to go back around the mountain. And I didn't even know I was out of the wilderness. I didn't know I was out of the woods. I had no clue. And that's how I found out I was. So yeah, he put me back around that mountain. And I know I'm out of it now. Actually, just this spring, everything's changing. So he's amazing. Our God is amazing.
Truly.
Oh yeah, he really is.
All right.
The other frustrating thing too is when there's so many. I know you and I have discussed this at a point before, that how so many in the body don't believe that our God can speak to his creation. Like it blows my mind. And when I hear that, that's the first thing that tips to me, is like, well, what am I doing beside you guys? You know what I mean? That is it's troubling. That I find very troubling.
So you're back in as part of another congregation now, and it's a fairly new one.
Yeah, well, I fellowship with them. I no longer believe in memberships. I cling to Messiah's word in Matthew 23, that, anybody seeking to be exalted shall be abased, they'll be humbled. And I just don't subscribe to this thinking that when somebody comes to me and asks me about membership, right? It's my first thought that comes to my mind is, well, is not Father's word good enough? Like, if me living by the Torah, me living by the book of the law, is that not good enough to serve in this place? Why do I need all these amended rules and do you know what I mean, that I need to adhere to?
I'll tell you why. And this is coming from someone who has led congregations, planted congregations.
Yes.
Because back in Yeshua's day, your word was your bond.
That's true.
Today, people are as flaky as pie crust. Yes, and they'll swear up and down that they're committed, and the first time that something goes sideways, they pick up their ball and they leave.
Gotcha.
And so while, yes, it's true that if you say that I'm committed here, that should be good enough. And if you're demonstrating through your walk,
your fruit,
that
absolutely.
This is your community and you're committed to it, that should be fine. But the reality is the vast majority of people need to put their signature on something, and it's a spiritual covenant is what it is. And to be honest with you, I wish that it wasn't necessary. But the amount of people that I've had come and go because they're not in the back of their minds committed, it makes the whole exercise a necessity.
Okay, but what happens now when you start to see that, not saying that this is the case here, but when you start to see a lot of these guys, especially guys who are unseasoned, they tend to fall towards dictatorship. Do you know what I mean? Like, they start telling you how to pray. These are the names you're supposed to use. Like, they start telling you, like, without them, it's almost like you can't do your walk with God. You know? And these are the things where my problem comes in, right? Yep. So that without you guys, or without this ministry, I don't labor, I don't do anything. Do you know what I mean? And this was one of the arguments that I got into with those guys at that place I just told you I blew up in so terribly. And this was one of the issues, because he put a call out. There was a brother in there who was in financial straits. I happen to know the history of this brother and his financial dire straits. And it's like, well, wait a second. I know that Father's been telling this guy for 10 years to get out of that job. I've been telling him forever. So now all of a sudden the guy kicks him out in the cold, takes the key off and leaves him with nothing. He's hanging on his ears. Well, wait a second. He's had 10 years to correct this problem. So this guy gets out there on the podium and everybody, it was a Wednesday or something. He puts his, hey, so-and-so lost his job. He needs some help financially, this and that. That coming Shabbat, 3 days later, this guy gets on the pulpit and starts chastising the entire congregation because nobody came forward with any money. It's like, hold on a second. It's been 2 days. It's been 3 days. So because if you don't dictate it, nobody's gonna help. Is this your position? Like, I mean, some of the stuff I seen going on and they're taking place, it's like, all right, that's enough of this. And it was,
Yeah.
I didn't, and I love those times when it's not me that's got to open my mouth, because normally I'm the big mouth, hey? And yeah, I like to talk. I'm normally that guy. But it's good when other people bring these issues up. Do you know what I mean? And another thing I've learned with the body that always troubled me too, because they know I'm a big mouth, but this is my own fault. I own this. That they know you're going to vent and say things. So when they have an issue with leadership, they may be too shy to tell them, but they'll come and tell you, hoping that you'll bring it to them. So, and I've done this numerous times. And just when you go look for the support from these people whose battle you're fighting there, you can see the back of the head and the bottom of their feet as they're going the other way. You know what I mean? After you've taken on their battle.
And that's why you never pick up anybody else's banner.
I try not to, not anymore. Unless it's something that's like, okay, we got to deal with this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But for the most part, yeah, I won't. If you're not willing to go out and deal with this yourself, then please don't include me.
Yeah, I'm not your pitbull.
Yeah, that's right. And that's that. But that only came after years of being on this walk. You come to understand these things. You become seasoned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So, where is the Lord leading you now? What do you see next for Winston? What does He want to use you for?
Well, I could answer that question clearly, but just this morning, but it's been evolving with me, and He's been trying to get me to a place to recognize this. There's actually a guy who called me from another ministry, and he told him the Father put a word in his ear about me, and it's evolving right now. You know what I mean? And I really don't want to speak on it too much right now, but let's just say Father's got big plans for me, and which explains why He put me under so much chastisement, because the more He requires from you, the more He's going to put you through. So I could speak on that, but I have to hold off on that because He's working something out. Let's just say that.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, but yeah, I just know that there is big plans ahead, and He's revealed some things to me about my walk and just exactly where I'm supposed to be, and even so much so as to say that when you stand up for me, how are you going to present yourself? Things like this,
Yeah.
And then He told me too, you got to work on your integrity. He's told me that. He's told me, do you know what I mean? And it's these past 3 years, I guess it's been. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then even after understanding the whole reason behind His lockdowns, and because that was all Father's will. That was all Father's will.
Oh, yes.
Gave each and every one of us an opportunity to go look in that mirror and say, okay, where are you? Where are you going, and where are you going to be?
Mm-hmm.
Who are you with? So as far as what His plans are for me right now, He has revealed them to me, and it's evolving, because I was thinking in a different path, a different light. Just this morning, He revealed to me that, okay, well, so-and-so still waiting on you, and you're almost there. So, yeah. So I got I'll be tight. But when it's coming through, you'll be the first to know. Well, one of the first to know.
Oh, that's fine.
But even now, like where I see it now, I don't care where I'm at now, right? Landing.
Mm-hmm.
I go in and I see there's a need, something needs to be done. I do it. Don't have to ask. You don't need to help. I'm just going to go take care of it. If it needs to be done, I go do it. You know what I mean?
You drive a bulldozer for a living, so it's kind of spiritual.
Yeah, well, yeah, you got that's right. You want to move things, you got to move them, and the dozer's going to move them. The dozer absolutely is going to move them.
So you're like the spiritual bulldozer that God wants to use.
Yeah, so there are things in the works, though. There are things in the works. But I am looking into setting up a YouTube channel as well. And by the way, folks, I don't know if any of you have read Darryl Weinberg's book. Here's my copy. Let me tell you something. And I'm going to say this, and this is not just to stroke Darryl Weinberg's ego, but I'm telling you, in all honesty, as I'm sitting here now as a believer in the Almighty and Messiah Yeshua, that this book, in all honesty, should be on the bookshelf of every believer walking this walk today. And I don't care if you're a Christian, I don't care if you're a Messianic, I don't care. And I'll also say, I spoke about Darryl about this on the phone, and I sincerely believe Father put this on his heart to write this book, because the wisdom contained there it is. The wisdom contained in this book, the knowledge, I mean, it covered all of the little inconsistencies in Christianity, their practices, Darryl, my hat's off to you, brother. And again, praise God, praise the Almighty for putting this work on your heart, because goodness gracious me, it is truly an amazing read. And I've plugged it all to my family members. I'm like, look, you guys got to read this book. My mother's the first person I went to. You got to read this book.
All right, well, that's very kind of you.
I've also spoken to one sister on the topic as well, because she's read it as well. And she was just taken back as well. It was just, wow. Great job, brother. Great job.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Winston. It has been a privilege and a real pleasure. I've never really heard a lot of your story before. We've crossed paths, but never had a chance to sit down and listen to it. So it's been great, and we look forward to seeing how God is going to use you going forward. Amen. And also what's going to happen when you finally stop walking around the mountain.
Amen. Amen.
And I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We've come to the end of our hour, and so just make sure that you tune in to Messianic Lamb Network for different shows on different aspects of what it means to walk this Messianic lifestyle. Hang tight, Winston, and we'll talk a bit after. But I want to say shalom, everybody. Shavua Tov. Thanks so much for joining us, and come back again next week, where we once again interview someone who's been walking this walk to be an encouragement to you. Blessings, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.